Chapter 1. All aboard the Free Gaza movement. Greta Berlin, one of 5 co-founders of the movement. Now that we have successfully sailed 2 small fishing boats into the port of Gaza, people are asking, how was this idea hatched? Who came up with such a crazy idea, to sail boats to Gaza? What were you thinking? The idea came from Michael Sheikh, a long-time activist from Australia. After Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006, several of us had been tossing ideas around about how to bring to the attention of the world that Israel was locking up Gaza while it attacked Lebanon. Michael wrote the following to us. Okay. I have been thinking about this for a long time, but am aware that I'm better at ideas than practicalities, so I'll outline what I'd envisaged and let the rest of you do the sanity check. My plan was this. Charter a big boat to sail from New York. Make it clear that its purpose is to break the siege of Gaza. That can be the slogan of the campaign. It is very important that the boat have a big send-off with speeches by important people that will get it as much publicity as possible. The ship sails to Gaza but stops along the way to pick up supplies from supporters. This would obviously require liaison with the relevant solidarity groups at the places where it was stopping. I was thinking of an itinerary along the lines of New York-Havan Air-London Casablanca Barcelona Marseilles Rome Istanbul Alexandria Gaza. The idea would be to build up publicity as we go. If we could get someone like Desmond Tutu to go at least part of the way, that would really help. Put pressure on other religious leaders to see us and give the boat their blessing. The hardest part would obviously be the Alexandria Gaza leg of the trip. I doubt that the Israeli military would try to sink the boat or anything. That was my plan. I think it could really bring some serious attention to the hidden violence of economic warfare that Israel is using against Gaza and put pressure on international actors to deal with the issue. Like I said, it's only an idea, and I don't know how much it would cost to charter a boat. It's a hell of a lot more ambitious than an airport sit-in, but I've been doing solidarity work for Palestine for almost 4 years now, and the situation on the ground there keeps getting worse and worse. I realize that just about everyone else reading this would probably share my frustration. So my thinking was that maybe it's time to think big and try to capture people's imaginations to force the issue. He sent that message in September 2006 to Mary Hughes Thompson, Hugh Whaler Araf, Sharon Locke, Paul Lerudi, Donna Wallach, and me. And thus an idea was hatched, and the Free Gaza movement was born. It turns out that several other people in other areas of the world were thinking the same thing. When we began to publicize that we were going to sail to Gaza, granted a much smaller project than what Michael has envisioned, activists began to add their ideas, asked to join our group, and the beginnings a long 2-year project started to take shape. If we had known it would take 2 years, 150 people, and eventually close to $1 million to sail 2 small fishing boats from Greece to Gaza, I'm not sure how many of us would have signed on to this crazy adventure. But we did. And we made history. Hillary, a UK volunteer. My introduction into the world of the Free Gaza movement came at a public meeting in Sheffield in 2007 where, in spite of ourselves, we became entranced by this crazy idea being presented to us through the ubiquitous PowerPoint. But this was unlike any other PowerPoint presentation I had seen. However, we are a pretty sensible bunch of activists, and we thought we knew a thing or two about fundraising for a cause as controversial as the Palestinians. So we asked the tough questions. How much is this going to cost? On hearing that it would be a modest $300,000, we protested that it didn't sound anywhere near enough, as if we knew anything about boat buying or sailing across the Mediterranean. And then the killer question: how much have you raised so far? Oh, well. So it was a great idea, but was it ever going to happen? I'd had a bit of experience getting funding from trusts for relatively unpopular causes, and this felt like a challenge I couldn't resist. Like most people though, I was already involved in far too many things, and I still thought it wasn't really realistic. And then Musher El Ferra, said, "Well, I need to be on that boat." Musha, who has lived in Sheffield for many years, is from Gaza and rages silently and not so silently about the way he is forbidden from traveling to his homeland. He is also the inspirational chair of Sheffield Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and one of the reasons for my involvement in working with Palestinian people. Well, if he was on board, then I had to be on board, too. Sherin and I spent many hours trawling through databases looking for likely trusts to which we could apply, and along the way we had some fairly tortuous phone calls. Try concisely answering the following. What are the aims of your organization? How are you going to achieve your aims? What are your short and long-term expected outcomes? The one I liked best was, who are the likely beneficiaries of your project? If possible, give an estimate of the numbers. Well, let's see, would 1.5 million Palestinians, plus about 2 million of their relatives throughout the world, be enough for you? And then, little by little, we got some money. Our first successful grant application was for £5,000, and even better, when we converted it to dollars, to let our friends across the Atlantic know, it sounded a lot bigger. But the long slog of fundraising was not particularly glamorous, and the number of trusts to which we could apply was pitifully small. Let's face it, most organizations are not interested in ideas about funding small boats sailing across the Mediterranean with the likelihood that they will be stopped and confiscated by the Israeli Navy. Added to that was the challenge of working with a steering group based in the United States. They didn't seem to understand our need for financial information to make our applications seem even remotely sane. After all, we were putting in applications for such an off-the-wall idea. The application itself had to come across as 100% boringly sensible and thorough. Part of the challenge, of course, was coming to terms with the well-known fact that British English and American English aren't exactly the same language. And while I was fussing, in my terribly British way, about the need for copies of constitutions and accounts, our colleagues in the States were coping with anxieties about so-called anti-terror legislation. One of our leading activists for FG in the United States, Riyad Hamid, was literally hounded to death by the FBI. Whether he committed suicide or he was murdered, he became the victim of constant US government harassment. See www.austinchronicle.com web link. In the end, we raised several £1,000s from a few trusts, mostly trusts started by good old lefty families with a bit of cash and a conscience. My favorite was the £1,000 we were awarded by the Lippmann Miliband Trust, a fund in the name of socialist intellectual Ralph Miliband. I wonder what his son, the current Foreign Secretary of the British government, would feel about his father's legacy being spent on the boats that were going to break the siege of Gaza. This was the first of two interesting links between the Free Gaza movement and British politicians. Calderdale and Manchester Palestine Solidarity people put on fundraiser after fundraiser, overwhelming Sherin, whose home region it was, with their enthusiastic work for a plan they could only support from a distance, and a diversity of groups and individuals all over the United Kingdom quietly handed over sums of various sizes. View from the UK, a backroom perspective. As the plans for the boat departure began to seem more and more real, a little bit of email discussion began to take place on how those of us left in Britain, the backroom team, were going to support those in Cyprus and on the boat. It was also becoming increasingly clear that the backroom team was not so much a team as, well, approximately two of us. Sherin was really the linchpin to much of the planning activity, including publicity, fundraising, and communication between activists in different countries, but she was heading off to Cyprus or wherever. None of us knew from where the boats would start, and that was fine by me. What I didn't know, I couldn't tell Mossad. Likewise Eliza and Osama, both heavily involved, would be either on the boat or the land team, as would Johnny. Other people, who had made contributions in the early days of the project were, for one reason or another, no longer able to give us much time. So in the last week or two before Sherin left, we tried to set up what we optimistically called the UK support team. We could see two roles for ourselves. First, working to generate publicity, and secondly, supporting and campaigning on behalf of the boat crew passengers if/when they got stopped or arrested by the Israelis. Since most of us thought this was the likely scenario, much of our attention was focused on this work, including identifying the members of parliament for our UK passengers, in order to be ready to bang down their doors if our boat got impounded, or the passengers were thrown into an Israeli jail. We decided to hold a press conference in London, and with the help of the London-based Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Johnny, later to join the Cyprus land team, was able to get some names who agreed to speak on our behalf. Getting a press pack together that would attract attention was tricky for all sorts of reasons. Basic factual information, like who the passengers were, kept changing. Much of the information was being kept secret. Some of our activists did not want any personal publicity, and crucially, we had no photos of anything, not even the boats. The other problem we faced was that although prospective passengers for the boat had been asked to provide short bios of themselves plus photos, only a minority had done so. This was very frustrating for those of us who were trying to interest the media. Of course, in a sense we didn't really want the individuals on the boat to be the story. The endurance and bravery of Palestinians in Gaza was the real story. The passengers didn't see themselves as heroes, but the dilemma was that we needed to make them famous in order to get the publicity that the boats needed in order to shout to the world that Gaza was under siege. And then I got a phone call. We had sent out an initial press release alerting media 2 weeks in advance about our planned press conference, which in turn was to be held about 4 days in advance of the departure of the boats. The day after the press release went out, the voice at the other end of my mobile said, "Hello, I'm Lauren Booth, and I want to be on the boat." Pause. I sort of felt as though I should know this person, but I didn't, and I made that classic mistake of not saying so straight away. As the conversation progressed, it became clear that she was a journalist, and that she was keen, no, not keen, absolutely 110% determined to be on our boat to Gaza. I tried to explain that I thought that the first boat was full, that we had a list of interested people for the second boat, and that, although we were very keen to have some journalists on board, we needed a balance of people with different things to offer. "Look," she said, in a polite but determined voice. "If I'm on that boat, and I get to Gaza 2 weeks after Tony Blair didn't, then it's going to be front page news." At last, the penny dropped. Blair. Booth. Blair Booth. I ran upstairs to my computer to see an email from the Palestine Solidarity Committee office alerting to me to the fact that a journalist was about to phone me, and that she was the sister-in-law of Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister. Blair was now the Middle East envoy for the quartet. He had been in post for over a year, and so far had not set foot inside the Gaza Strip. Blair was apparently oblivious to the conditions under which people were living there. Just 2 weeks previously he had cancelled his first proposed visit to Gaza following security advice from Israel. A flurry of emails to and from the States and elsewhere followed. Were we or were we not interested in having the sister-in-law of Tony Blair on board? Some rapid Googling revealed that Lauren had written some excellent articles about her previous visits to occupied Palestine, and that she had also been a contestant on the British reality TV show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here Bad, at least in the eyes of some of us more earnest activists. There was some anxiety about involving a journalist who wrote pieces for British tabloids, but we were aware that Lauren was, of course, dead right. Her involvement would be a huge publicity coup for Free Gaza, and not just in the UK, but in the States, and across the Arab world. Vangelis Pisius in Athens. Finding the Dimitris K, The Future Free Gaza. May 2008. Dear Paul, Greta, dear all. We can celebrate. We are serious. Just now I came back home from a shipyard little bit far from Athens. I found it an excellent boat, wood beams of high quality. Date of birth 1980, almost completely rehabilitated. very close friend who I'd asked to make investigations in that area, knows the story of this strong and safe boat. He was involved in rehabilitation works, and he assures follow-up for some marginal adaptations.